Bombshell tonight. Nolan Wells audio distress call. Is it real? Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us.
Detail assistance, Vicky speaking. How can I help you?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership.
All right, of course. How far is the water coming up, sir? Can you give me a description? Ankles?
What'd
Hello?
you say? Hey,
Yes, how far is the water coming up, sir?
it's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. Like we're going down now.
All right, well, let's get you going. Membership number or phone number listed on the account, sir?
I don't know the phone number. It's either. I think it's. Try that.
All right.
I know we have a membership, like guaranteed. I don't
All
have
right,
the tag
unless
on
you
here.
have a
It got ripped
membership
off.
number or anything, it's okay. I'll get you over to the captain. What's the best phone number to reach you at?
Reach me at.
You are hearing the audio distress call from the boat. That is the boat on which Nolan Wells went to Horn Island. Now, there have been a lot of different accounts about whether he was on the boat when he came back from Horn Island, when he was supposed to come back from Horn Island. He never came back from Horn Island. And you can clearly hear on that version, which we obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Research. They released it. It's not something off TikTok or Insta. Dave Mack, Crime Stories investigative reporter. What are we hearing?
Nancy, this is the audio call from the boat that Nolan Wells took out to Horn Island. And the boat is attempting to leave Horn Island because the boat is taking on water. What we are hearing is the call from the boat to the group they have that handles towing and other.
Let me help you. Reminder, Dave Mack, we've only got 1 hour to cover a lot of territory. That is the sea tow call where the grandson of the boat owner thinks that they're taking on water. Joining me right now, special guest Brandon Tatum. He is a former police officer with Tucson PD, and he is the star of The Officer Tatum on YouTube. He has interviewed Nolan's friends. Now, we're about to bring on two experts, each one taking a different viewpoint on that call. But, Officer Tatum, thank you for being with us tonight. No matter what you say, just know you're going to get hate mail. Doesn't matter what you say. If the angel Gabriel came down right now and spoke on this case, he would get hate mail. That said, what do you make of that audio, officer?
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for having me on. If you put the audio within context, it is an impossibility unless these people are prophesying that somehow they're saying Nolan's name or projecting that Nolan is somehow injured, hurt, or killed, because we have witnesses that have come out. When I interviewed Warren, a lot of those kids that I talked to already alluded to this way before the audio came out, that they were gone. And people had already saw Nolan after they had left. The young lady, Katie, that he was hanging out with, I saw a text message from her alluding to the fact that she never saw him get on that boat at all. We have video of the boat that we shared on our social media page, and it shows all the occupants on the boat, and Nolan was not there. And so if a person thinks that they've heard something on the audio, they have to compare it with context. Maybe they said, "Is it dead?" talking about items that could potentially have died or damaged on the boat, given the fact that they were sinking. So I think people need to put this in context and reevaluate what they're listening to on the video, because if you are going to make a staunch stance in the wrong direction, in my opinion, by saying they're obviously talking about Nolan, it is incredibly impossible. One more thing real quick, that when you look at where they were at when they made the phone call and their GPS coordinates, it literally put them on the island. And we know, and not on the physical island, but really close proximity to the island. And we know, because we have another video of Nolan being out there and also all the other boats surrounding him, that this would have had to happen very near to hundreds of people in hundreds of different boats. So somebody would have seen something if there was a dramatic commotion like this occurring on that boat.
I hear what you're saying, Officer Brandon Tatum. That last part that you said, that there were hundreds of people around and they would have seen what happened, that part, I disagree with that. John Mobley joining us, veteran trial lawyer out of South Carolina. John, take off your defense hat one moment and let's address that statement. Do I have to say Tupac? That just comes off the top of my head. Crimes happen all the time in a crowded area and nobody sees anything. Either they say they didn't see anything, or they really didn't see anything, because it all blends in, right? It all blends in. I've had a little boy thrown off the 3rd level of the Mall of America almost to his death. He did die and he was brought back to life. Nobody saw what happened. A guy threw him over. People were all over the mall. The food court was crowded. Nobody saw. I had like 2 witnesses. So I think part of it is, Mobley, you don't expect to see something, and so your mind is not interpreting, it's not intercepting what you're physically seeing. And again, we don't know what happened. We don't know why Nolan Wells has a red mark on the back of his occipital. We don't know. Was he hit? Did he fall? Then fall off a boat? It could have been any number of things. Some nefarious, some an accident, some negligent. My point is, just because there's a lot of people around, that does not guarantee you witnesses, Mobley. You know that better than anybody with all the cases you've tried.
Well, Nancy, I got to call it like I see it. I think there are 2 things I want to say to address that. The first part, I would agree with you that, yes, a lot of people can be around and they can notice something, and something can happen rather, and people not see it. However, I think the way that the human mind works, we would all agree, is we perceive things all the time, okay? And we may perceive something that at the time we perceive it, it is not deemed significant. However, in this case, I do believe that if someone did see something that they didn't pay particular attention to involving Nolan Wells, once all of this has come out, the way the mind works is it'll trigger what they saw before, because now it becomes significant, okay? So I do agree that people can perceive things and not pay attention to them, but when something significant happens later, sort of like being robbed, you're not paying attention to what everybody's wearing, but if that one of somebody robs you and later on you have to recall what that person is wearing, what they look like, you can recall it because it's important at that point. But at the time they perceived it, it was not important. So that's what I want to make sure I discuss. And I do want to address, you talk about the red mark on the back of his head. I mean, I think that is a red herring. That's something that everybody kind of latched onto because they're so desperate for any information that might be related to the cause of his death. But even the own pathologist that conducted the autopsy did not
him up. Mobley, are you a medical doctor? Yes, no.
I know how to examine forensic evidence based on the countless homicides that I've tried.
Listening, not hearing, yes, no. You're not a medical doctor.
I'm a juris doctor.
Are you a medical examiner?
I am not.
No. Put up the back diagram, the back of the head of Nolan Wells from the second autopsy right now. You know what? I give it to you, Mobley. You're a great trial lawyer. A medical examiner, you ain't. And I don't know why you're saying people are latching onto this, grabbing at straws. I'm looking right at it, man. Should I believe you or my lying eyes? I am looking at the second autopsy. And I have questioned multiple actual medical examiners, actual doctors that say that means something. Put him up again. In what world would the first medical examiner remove Nolan's throat if it did not have something probative about it, something that proves something. Did they remove his toe? No. His elbow? No. His eyeball? His nose? No. They took his throat. Do not tell me that a medical doctor, which you are not, took a throat out of this young man because it means nothing. And then, you know what? I can't even hear you. Straight out to Joe Scott Morgan joining us, professor of forensics, death investigator. That second doctor did not highlight that in red for nothing. That doctor is not grabbing at straws, as Mobley said. I don't know why he's saying that.
No, you're right. He has purpose. We have purpose in everything that we do in the medical legal world. And so when you see this highlighted area, it's unique in the way he has diagrammed it here. He even demonstrates it that it has almost like margins to it. And, you know, that's what has left a big question for us, because it's not like it's diffuse all over the place where you've got these kind of spotty alignments. He's got a margin. It almost looks like a rectangle, doesn't it? Well, when we begin to see things like that, we think about patterns. And that's some of the questions that have yet to be answered. But what he does say in his relative to the second examination is that he did a multi-layered dissection. Now, this area had not been dissected by the ME's office in Mississippi. So what he's doing is he's going layer by layer. We're talking about the skin. We're talking about the subcu fat. We're talking about the musculature that's under there. And yes, there is musculature under there. And what his conclusion is, Nancy, is that there's significant decomposition at this point in time. So he cannot make a determination about these markings one way or another. He needs more information. And admittedly, in this second autopsy, he says this is pending investigation, and that's key here.
Okay. Joe Scott Morgan.
Yes.
He, the first medical examiner, removed the throat.
Yes.
No other part of the body, except for the lungs, removed the throat and the lungs. We know why he took the lungs. I don't have to be a death investigator like yourself with 10,000 death investigations under my belt to know why he took the lungs, to see if Nolan drowned. But the fact that someone has a lungs full of water does not tell me how they got in the water. Did he fall? Was he hit? Was he held under? Was it an accident? Did you see that video? Pull it up if you can, control room, of all those ships, all those boats out there. If he was between one of those boats, lost his footing, went under, got the riptide, no one may have noticed. All right? No one may have noticed. Look at all that. And there were apparently 300 or so people out there. This is just a tiny microcosm. It's July the 4th. Everybody's at Horn Island having a good time. So it could be any number of ways he landed under the water. But my point is, that's why they took the lungs. Why the throat?
Well, because the throat and the throat area, as you're referring to it as, it's actually the organs of the neck. We're talking about the larynx, the pharynx, our windpipe, essentially, and everything else that's connected therein. That's the conveyance to get into the lungs. So one of the things, what they're looking at here, Nancy, to put it very bluntly, is they're looking for any possibility that his breathing could have been compromised. Well, how is that compromised? Well, when you begin to think about, if you put your hand in the midline of your throat, right here, okay, you begin to think about the trachea, which is encompassed right here. Was it compromised in any way? Are there any focal areas of hemorrhage? Has it been crushed? You would go up into the neck. I suspect that the tongue was probably removed as well. You're going to look at the hyoid, which, did not accompany the body. But all of this has been retained. There's nothing abnormal about the state retaining the organs of the neck. This happens very, very frequently in cases like this because they want to be able to go back and examine it. And also for the future, they either want to get a consult on it or it has evidentiary probative value here.
We're bringing in our forensics experts, but back to Brandon Tatum, former police officer, Tucson PD. He is the star of the Officer Tatum on YouTube. He has interviewed Nolan's friends. Okay, you're saying that I am looking at, and others are looking at this out of context. My mind is open. You may be right. And I believe, Officer Tatum, you are specifically referring to the words, let's see the transcript of the audio as I read this, please. You're referring to alleged statements. Sure, he's dead? Is he dead? Nolan. OMG. Nolan, don't die. Then wake the F up. I thought he was on the check his chest. Now, to you, Officer Tatum, you believe that there is an innocent explanation. My mind is open. And that innocent explanation would be what?
Well, I think that if you are convinced without context that they are talking about Nolan, you're going to hear certain things and perceive it. I mean, the bilge pump is damaged. They could have been saying, don't die, or is it dead, referring to the bilge pump or the bilge pump. And they could have been talking about a battery. They could have been saying no, and people think they said Nolan. The only reason that I deviate from the transcript is because there are witnesses that have said they've seen Nolan after the boys had already left and after the call was already made. And also, I put my detective mind on, when I look at the reasoning, but why would they be calling and giving GPS coordinates and talking to this dispatch for 8 minutes if their best friend, whom I've spoke to these boys, they've showed me pictures, they were emotional about Nolan's death. I was there during the funeral, at least there with them when the funeral was going on, and they were devastated that they couldn't go to his funeral. I perceive that it doesn't make sense if they had killed their friend in a malicious way or he was dead, that they wouldn't just simply ask for help instead of trying to cover it up and calling for a tow and talking for 8 minutes. I mean, all of those things, plus the witnesses, it just doesn't add up. And I just wish people would be open-minded to saying, let me rewatch it and let me put it within context that Nolan cannot be on the boat because witnesses seen him afterwards. And let me re-listen to it and try to put it in perspective.
So you're saying witnesses saw him afterwards, after that call, or did you mean to say witnesses saw him elsewhere?
Yeah, no, witnesses saw him on the island after the call. After the boys had left around 4:30, witnesses have seen Nolan alive on the island after that. So, you know, that puts Nolan alive after that. And I think that people should be focused on, okay, now let's interview and talk to people and consider what did they see, because we're already past the point of Warren and Wyatt's boat and all of those things being involved.
Officer Tatum, I had so many trial judges from all the cases I tried in different courtrooms, but one particular judge, my favorite, Luther Alverson, he had a particular jury charge, and I've heard it so many times, I've memorized it. He said to the jury at the end of the case, after the closings, it is your duty to make all witnesses speak the truth and impugn perjury on no one. So, what I'm trying to do is reconcile what you're saying with what I'm hearing. I hope Nolan Wells died by accident. But I'm not shutting down our Crime Stories investigation until I know. Now, I want to address this sound. To Joe Scott Morgan, a professor of forensics, Jacksonville State University, author of Blood Beneath My Feet on Amazon. At Jacksonville State University, they have a world-class CrimPro lab and setup. In fact, I've called on Morgan many times to help me recreate crimes in their labs. Star of Body Bags with Joe Scott Morgan. Joe Scott, you've been on so many death scenes, trying desperately to get to my experts, but I got to lay the foundation, as I would do in court, before I bring in a piece of evidence. Joe Scott, people do crazy things when somebody dies. They panic. They think it's their fault, whether it is or it isn't. They get rid of the body. They lie. They do all sorts of things. The cover-up is very often worse than what the initial incident was. People panic. So the reaction of the friends to Nolan potentially having passed, that reaction doesn't mean that much to me, because you don't know what somebody's going to do under those circumstances. So hearing them on the boat, I hear what Tatum is saying, and it's reasonable. But how people act in that scenario is not always reasonable.
No, it's not, particularly when they're faced with somebody that's in distress and they are under the influence of alcohol. And that's going to play a huge role in this from an investigative standpoint. And not to mention, probably a group of people that don't have a lot of experience with alcohol. We're talking about a group of underage kids. We're not talking about upper end college kids here. We're talking about kids that are 18 years old. They've been getting hammered out there on this island, and that's a problem, Nancy.
Well, you're right. Okay, not that Tatum, in his own right, is not an expert. He's a former police officer with Tucson. Joe Scott, an expert. Mobley, an expert. But now let's go to our digital experts. First, Todd Shipley joining us, digital cybercrime expert, former Detective Sergeant, Reno PD, 25 years in law enforcement, author of Surviving a Cyber Attack, Securing Social Media, Protecting Your Home, author of Investigating Internet Crimes, An Intro to Solving Crimes in Cyberspace. He says nothing he hears on this audio shows that the audio has been altered. Okay, Shipley, hit it.
Well, we have to look at the fact that the audio that we received is, again, one of those that was released by the press and is probably been stepped on multiple times. Just like we had last year with another famous video.
Did you say that was released by the press? Hold on, Tom. That was not released by the press.
It was
released to the press, but it was released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. That was not released by the media.
Yes, Nancy, but TMZ in every station that's released it has put a copy that they've edited up onto online. And so we have this expectation bias that's there. So the audio obviously is real. It's been released, and the agency that released it has said that it's a video or audio of the incident, but every version that we've seen has been stepped on multiple times. And so there's an expectation bias when you start putting up audio translations that you believe is there, and everybody then has this confirmation of that this is what's said. Now, we have to go back to the original audio from the government agency to get the information that we need to prove what's there in the audio, because multiple pieces released through press stations online don't always have the exact audio we want. There's already been speculation that some of the different audio, like TMZ's and the others, are a little bit edited, and they always are, because you put them on there for a specific purpose. And adding the edited versions of what you think are the audio does not necessarily mean that that's what it is. We can look at the audio and find out what's there, but we've got to look at the original version.
Joining us now, in addition to Brandon Tatum, Joe Scott Morgan, John Mobley, now with us, Robert Freed, joining us out of Long Island, Certified Forensics Analyst, EVP of Forensics, and Chief Investigative Officer at Page One, Inc., author of 5 books, including Forensics Data Collections 2.0, and a book series, and his website is forensicsbyfreed.com, F-R-I-E-D, Freed. Okay, you say there are a lot of red flags. What are they?
Absolutely. Nancy, what I look at evidence is it possible to authenticate the evidence? the information that's being provided.
And understand, I'm not disagreeing with you. But my question is, what are the red flags that concern you about this audio? Now, Tatum says the audio's fine. It's just they're not talking about Nolan. They're talking about the bilge pump or the battery or the engine. And you're taking it, some people are taking it in the wrong context. I'm not taking it in any context. I'm trying to find out, what am I hearing? So that's Tatum's take, okay? Shipley says, I think it's legit. You're saying it may not be legit because of red flags. The fact that it is or not authenticated, how it's been enhanced, that's a concern. What do you see as a problem? One thing I noticed you said earlier before tonight is that on the TMZ version, there's an additional 20 seconds. Now, I've got a problem with that. Hold on. Mobley, I'd have a problem with that if somebody gave me, let's just say, a bank robbery video, and then I find out there's 20, 30 seconds missing. Oh, no. You have to have it all. And the last thing I want is somebody adding in video. So that's a red flag to me. That's one of Freed's observations.
Nancy, this is what I think. I think that, both of these gentlemen make excellent points, but they're missing the link to tie it all together. And that's what's important.
And let me guess, you, John Mobley, are the only one that knows the missing link. Okay, I got to hear this. Go ahead.
Well, what you need to do when you have that audio is, irrespective of the method that was used to enhance it, because just because it's enhanced, I don't see it something that's being used in the courtroom as much as the newsroom. But you want to take that audio and then you go back to the witnesses, okay? And you want to make sure you interview them separately, not together, because you don't want them to somehow commingle in their stories, but ask them separately. Play the audio for the witnesses that were on the boat, play it for them separately, individually, and ask them to corroborate what they're saying, okay? And what's going to happen is
Tatum said he did that. Yeah, you're right, Mobley. With that, I agree. Back to you, Robert Freed. Given what Tatum, Shipley, and Mobley are saying, the red flags, let's go with that TMC version. What about that? Is that a concern?
Yeah, I mean, I heard hold music when that started, and there's a lot of commotion going on in the background. It's really difficult to actually say, what people are actually saying in those particular versions. Yes, you do need to apply filters. You do need to apply different ways to focus in on it. But my whole thing with the different audios that are out there are that people are doing enhancements. They're posting this. They're doing amateur methodologies, and they're putting it out there saying, this is what you need to hear. Take a look. They're putting the words out there before people are even listening to the videos. So it's automatically setting the stage for everybody to start paying attention to things a little bit more. But again, if you have to go back to looking at this from the source, that's the best bet, because that's going to allow you to look at this unfiltered. And that's probably what law enforcement has. There could be snippets that are missing in those specific moments that are redacted, for example, that may hold more clues that we're not hearing. We don't know exactly what's said in those moments that we don't have full access to.
Okay, that is an interesting point. That could be very probative. Of course, enhancements are used in court all the time, so a jury can hear what's being said. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you say, Freed, you have to authenticate and explain what you did, like we just had Dave Mack explain. And yes, it was all written down, FYI. But
excellent.
You stated that on an earlier occasion, much of this tape, this audio was redacted. How do you know anything was redacted, or are you guessing?
Well, the phone numbers, you can hear the cuts in the phone numbers where they say, what's your phone number? What's your account number? And it's basically blank. It's not anything. It's silent. So right there, we're missing the account number, the private information, but we're also missing what else is going on in the background. Within a couple of seconds, people can say something that would be really important. We're not getting that full picture.
Just imagine this. A phone rings through 8 miles of open water. On the other end, a teenager's voice is shaking. The boat is taking on water, he tells the dispatcher. They're sinking. Somewhere behind him, other voices are talking over each other, half swallowed by static and panic. Nobody on that call is thinking about what's being recorded. Nobody knows that months from now, complete strangers around the world will slow this same audio down second by second, arguing over 3 words buried in the noise. Words that would end up defining a national investigation before most people even knew the name of the person they were fighting about. Because somewhere on that boat, in the middle of that emergency, there was a question, a short one. The kind of question you ask when something has gone terribly wrong, and you're too afraid to say it any louder than a whisper. By the time anyone outside that boat heard it, the person those voices may have been asking about was already gone. His name was Nolan Wells, 18 years old, a football player with a scholarship and a plan for that week. He went out to a barrier island for the 4th of July with a group of friends, and he never came home. What happened between that boat leaving the island and his body being found 2 days later has since split into 2 competing autopsies, a sitting judge whose own family got pulled into the case, a wave of arrests over death threats sent to total strangers, and a piece of audio that's been picked apart by forensic experts, amateur investigators, and millions of people online, all convinced they know exactly what they're hearing, and almost none of them agreeing with each other. Before we go further, a word of caution. This case involves the death of a real young man, and parts of what we're about to cover, the investigation, the forensic detail, the online fallout, may be difficult to sit with. If that's not something you're up for today, that's completely understandable. For everyone else, welcome to True Crime Daily. If you're new here, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. And to everyone who's already part of this channel, thank you. Every share, every comment, every like has helped this case, and cases like it reach people who never would have heard the full story otherwise. Now, let's get into what actually happened. July 4th, off the coast of Mississippi. The west tip of Horn Island, a barrier island inside the Gulf Islands National Seashore, roughly 8 miles from the nearest shoreline. No cell towers, no lifeguards, nothing but sand, pine, and open water. A boat is taking on water. A young man picks up the radio and dials CTO. A dispatcher named Vicky answers. He tells her the bilge pump has failed, water is rising, he needs a tow, and he needs it fast. What follows is 8 minutes of back and forth. Vicky asking for a membership number he can't recall, asking how high the water's gotten, asking if everyone on board is safe. His answers come out broken, distracted, talked over by other voices in the background that are hard to make out clearly. At the time, this was just one boat, one mechanical failure, one call among hundreds placed off the Mississippi coast that holiday weekend. It would not stay that way. Weeks later, this same recording would be pulled from state records, clipped, slowed down, and picked apart by millions of people online, all trying to answer one question neither the caller nor the dispatcher could have known would matter. Was someone already in trouble before this call was ever made? We're going to walk through exactly what's on that recording, what investigators say it does and doesn't prove, and how a routine tow request became the center of a national controversy. If you want the full breakdown before the grand jury decision comes down, subscribe now. This channel is tracking every update as it happens. Before he was a name attached to a court case, Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a wide receiver, and about to head back to campus. He grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a small coastal city on the Gulf, the kind of place where a lot of families know each other for generations. That's where he was raised, and that's where his family still lives today. By the summer of 2026, Wells was heading into his freshman season playing wide receiver for Southwest Mississippi Community College, a 2-year school in Summit, Mississippi, about 70 miles south of Jackson. Summit is a small town, built around the campus itself, with barely 2,000 residents and a football program the community shows up for. Wells had only just finished his first stretch of training with the team. According to his father, Elmore Wansley, he was due back on campus that same week, ready to keep building toward the season. Friends and family describe him as someone who took football seriously, who showed up to work, and who had his sights set on what came next. He was raised Catholic and by most accounts close to his family. His mother, Christine Wells Wansley, and his father, Elmore Wansley, are the two voices who've spoken most often since July, not as case witnesses, but as parents trying to hold their son's name and story together while investigators do their work. That's the version of Nolan Wells that existed before July 4th. Not a headline, not a controversy. a teenager training for his first college football season, a few days away from getting back on that field in Summit. It's worth sitting with that for a second because everything that comes next, the boat, the island, the audio, happened to that person, not to a case file, to an 18-year-old who had a plan for that week and never got to follow through on it. Horn Island isn't the kind of place you end up by accident. It sits inside the Gulf Islands National Seashore, a federally protected wilderness roughly 8 to 10 miles off the Mississippi coast, reachable only by boat. There's no shelter there, no facilities, no cell signal once you're far enough out. It's popular precisely because it's untouched. Sugar white sand, no crowds, no infrastructure. On a holiday weekend, hundreds of boats anchor along its shoreline. That's where Nolan Wells spent the 4th of July, part of a group of friends who'd made the trip out together, the way a lot of local families and friend groups do every year. Among that group was Trayston Shepard, a friend of Wells's from high school. Also on the boat was the stepson of Jackson County Chancery, Judge Ashley Cole, a detail that wouldn't mean much that day, but would matter a great deal later, once her name became attached to the case in a very different way. At some point in the afternoon, the group made the decision to head back to the mainland. Wells didn't go with them. What happened in the moments before that boat left is where the accounts start to diverge, and the gap between them is part of why this case hasn't gone away. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has said Wells chose to stay behind on the island, with plans to catch a ride back to shore later that afternoon. Judge Ashley Cole has said the boat that had carried Wells out left around 4:30 p.m. because it was taking on water. The same boat, it turns out, connected to the distress call you heard at the top of this video. Separately, the commander of the United Cajun Navy has said he'd heard Wells wanted to stay behind to talk to a girl he'd met on the island. 3 different explanations, not necessarily contradictory. A boat can take on water and a teenager can also want to stay and talk to someone, but none of them fully explain what happened in the hours after that boat pulled away without him. What's certain is this: the friends who arrived with Nolan Wells left Horn Island that afternoon, and he was not with them. When the boat returned to the mainland without Nolan Wells that evening, his family didn't immediately know something was wrong. It wasn't until later that night, close to 11 p.m., that a call came in from one of the friends who'd been on the island. And that call is what set everything else in motion. His mother, Christine Wells Wansley, and his father, Elmore Wansley, reported him missing that same night. From there, the case moved into the hands of the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, headquartered in Pascagoula, the county seat and the agency responsible for law enforcement across the unincorporated areas of Jackson County, including the barrier islands offshore. Sheriff John Ledbetter's office launched a search that stretched into the following day, combing the waters around Horn Island and the surrounding shoreline. In the early hours of that search, Ledbetter told reporters there was no initial indication of a crime. His working theory, based on what investigators knew at the time, was that Wells had likely drowned, a tragic but not uncommon outcome for someone stranded overnight near open water with no way to signal for help. That statement would end up carrying more weight than it seemed to at the time. It was the first official word on what might have happened, and it set the tone for how the case was initially covered, as a probable accident, not a crime scene. The search continued for 2 days. On July 6th, a National Park Service ranger patrolling the island located Wells' body in the water just off Horn Island's shoreline. The National Park Service manages Horn Island as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, which meant federal personnel were present on the island well before local investigators arrived by boat. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lynn Jr. was brought in once the body was recovered. Given the circumstances, an unsupervised death on a remote island, more than 36 hours after Wells was last confirmed seen, Lynn made the call to request a full state autopsy rather than close the case out locally. That single decision is what kept this from becoming a quiet, unremarkable drowning report. It meant the body would go to the state medical examiner. The findings would eventually have to go before a grand jury, and every detail of what happened on that island and on that boat would end up under a level of scrutiny nobody involved could have predicted in those first 48 hours. For now, the sheriff's early theory stood: no clear sign of a crime, a probable drowning, and a family left to wait for answers that wouldn't come easily. The recording you heard in the opening didn't stay contained to CTO's internal files for long. In the weeks after Wells's body was found, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources released that same call to media outlets under public records requests. What had been 8 minutes of routine emergency dispatch became the most scrutinized piece of audio in the entire case. The original release was straightforward: a teenager reporting a failing bilge pump, a dispatcher walking him through next steps, confirmation that all 7 people aboard were safe, GPS coordinates given so a tow could be dispatched. Records later showed the boat was towed several miles before its equipment started working again, and it eventually returned to the same launch point the group had departed from earlier that day. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Within days, outlets and independent creators began circulating versions of the recording they described as enhanced, processed to bring out quieter background sound beneath the caller's voice. Some listeners who heard these versions came away convinced they could make out other voices in the background reacting to some kind of medical emergency, including what sounded like someone's name being called out with urgency, along with phrases that suggested panic or distress. Once those claims spread, they spread fast, reposted, clipped, and stitched into thousands of videos with the alleged phrases layered as on-screen text, whether or not the poster had verified anything themselves. Not everyone was convinced the enhanced versions were reliable. Digital forensics expert Robert Fried reviewed one widely shared version and raised concerns about its authenticity, pointing out it ran roughly 20 seconds longer than the original file released by the state and carried a different digital fingerprint altogether, meaning it wasn't a clean copy of what MDMR had actually put out. Fried said he wanted access to the original file's metadata before drawing any conclusions about what was or wasn't audible in the background. Other investigators who reviewed the case, including people with law enforcement backgrounds, pushed back on the viral interpretation entirely, arguing the timeline made it difficult to reconcile with witness accounts that placed Wells alive and on the island after the boat had already left. What's actually verifiable is this. The call was real, it was released by a state agency, and it does contain background commotion that's difficult to isolate cleanly even with audio enhancement. What the background voices are actually saying, and whether any of it relates to Wells at all, remains genuinely disputed, not confirmed by law enforcement, not settled by the forensic experts who've reviewed it, and not resolved by the family's own retained audio engineers, who were still conducting their independent review as of the most recent public updates. That unresolved gap between what people believe they're hearing and what can actually be verified is exactly why this recording became the center of the case's biggest controversy. It turned a mechanical failure on a boat into a piece of evidence millions of people now believe holds the answer to what happened to Nolan Wells, whether that belief is justified or not. We're going to keep tracking this specific thread of the investigation as new forensic analysis comes in. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want that update the moment it drops, because this is very likely the piece of evidence the grand jury spends the most time on. The state's investigation into how Nolan Wells died began less than 24 hours after his body was recovered. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office completed its autopsy on July 7th, the day after Wells was found. But completing an autopsy and releasing its findings are two different things. And more than a month later, the state's full report still hadn't been made public. Officials cited pending toxicology results as the reason for the delay, with release ultimately depending on the prosecutor's office rather than the medical examiner directly. That silence from the state is part of why Wells's family pursued a second opinion. They brought in Dr. Roger A. Mitchell Jr., a board-certified forensic pathologist, former chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., and president of the National Medical Association, to conduct an independent examination. Mitchell received Wells's body on July 10th, nearly a week after the state had already completed its own autopsy, and notably, after that first examination had already altered what remained for him to examine. What Mitchell found, and didn't find, is where the real complexity of this case lives. He identified no lacerations, fractures, or deep tissue injuries on Wells's body, but he did note red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of the head, and he could not determine what caused it. That kind of discoloration can come from ordinary decomposition changes in the muscle tissue after death. It can also come from blunt force trauma. Without further testing, there was no way to tell which explanation applied here, and the state's decomposition-heavy handling of the body by that point made it even harder to say for certain. To understand why, it helps to know what a multi-layered dissection actually involves. A forensic pathologist doesn't just look at the surface of an injury site. They work down through the tissue in stages. The skin first, then the layer of subcutaneous fat beneath it, then the muscle underneath that. Each layer can hold different information. A bruise that's faded from the skin might still show up in the muscle below it. Mitchell performed this kind of layered examination across multiple regions of Wells's body: his face, scalp, neck, ribs, pelvis, back, and limbs, specifically to look for anything the first autopsy might have missed or couldn't have documented after the state's own dissection had already taken place. There was another obstacle Mitchell couldn't work around. Internal structures from the front of Wells's neck, including portions of his trachea, laryngeal cartilage, and hyoid bone, had not been returned with the body. Retaining those structures for further testing is a recognized, standard practice in forensic pathology, particularly when there's any possibility of neck compression or airway injury. But it meant Mitchell was examining a body without access to the exact tissue most relevant to determining whether Wells could breathe in his final moments, or whether anything happened to his airway before he entered the water. Toxicology results from the state's autopsy also hadn't come back yet by the time Mitchell completed his exam, leaving another gap in the picture. Given all of that, Mitchell's conclusion was careful and deliberately unresolved. Both the cause and manner of Wells's death were classified as undetermined, pending further investigation. He stated plainly that he could not rule out the possibility that non-accidental factors contributed to what happened. Two separate medical examinations, conducted less than a week apart on the same body, and neither one produced a definitive answer. Not because the science failed, but because critical pieces of evidence were either still pending, already altered, or not accessible to the second examiner. That gap is exactly what's kept this case in front of a grand jury instead of closed as an accidental drowning. Nolan Wells' death became a national story for reasons that go beyond the mystery itself. He was black. The friends he traveled to Horn Island with that day were, by most accounts, a mostly white group. In a state with Mississippi's history, that detail alone was enough to pull national civil rights attention into a case that started as a missing person report. That attention found its clearest moment on July 22nd, when civil rights attorney Ben Crump stood before reporters at the Nockeys National Convention in Chicago, Illinois, and read the results of the independent autopsy findings to the country. Crump, who has represented the families of Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, and Tyre Nichols in similar circumstances, has served since July as the Wells family's attorney, publicly pushing for transparency from Mississippi investigators and prosecutors throughout the case. Mississippi's own state officials push back on the framing. Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tyndall publicly disputed the idea that Mississippi's handling of the case reflected the state's past, arguing the investigation was being conducted properly. Then came a twist almost nobody following the case from a distance expected. One of the friends who had been on Horn Island with Wells that day, and among the last people known to have seen him, was Warren Hudson, the son of a sitting Jackson County Chancery Court judge, Ashley Cole. Cole took to Facebook in the days after Wells' death, identifying herself as a judge while describing what her son had told her, that he'd last seen Wells around 3 that afternoon, and that Wells had chosen to stay behind on the island, planning to return with another group later. The post was intended, she said, to dispel rumors. Instead, it drew intense scrutiny of its own, including a public petition calling for her removal from the bench over concerns that a sitting judge commenting publicly on an active death investigation involving her own son crossed an ethical line. The backlash didn't stay online in the abstract. In mid-July, a 27-year-old man from Sacramento, California, Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarce, allegedly sent Cole a series of messages through Facebook threatening to mail a bomb to her office. The FBI investigators traced the account back to him, and he was charged with transmitting a threatening communication across state lines, a federal charge carrying up to 5 years in prison. He wasn't the only one. Court records show at least 2 other people were separately charged around the same time for threats tied to the case, targeting other officials and witnesses connected to the investigation. Cole said afterward that she deactivated her Facebook account and feared for her children's safety. What started as a missing person case on a remote barrier island had, within weeks, become something much larger, a flashpoint for conversations about race, policing, and how quickly online speculation can turn into real-world danger for people only tangentially connected to a tragedy. If you want the facts on this case without the noise everyone else is adding to it, that's what this channel does. Subscribe, and share this with someone who's been trying to follow the story. Since Wells's body was recovered, the case has moved from an active search into something slower and far more procedural, and much of that process is happening in near total silence, by design. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office completed its official autopsy back on July 7th, the day after Wells was found. But that report has never been made public. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, whose office is based in Pascagoula, has said repeatedly that the findings will stay sealed until they're presented to a grand jury, and that this isn't special treatment for a high-profile case. It's standard procedure. Under Mississippi law, McElrath has explained, every death in the county that isn't from natural causes or a non-criminal accident goes before a grand jury before results are released, and the rules of professional conduct restrict what a prosecutor can say publicly while an investigation remains active. That explanation hasn't quieted public frustration. As recently as this week, McElrath issued another statement directly addressing criticism that her office lacks transparency, writing that she does not have the freedom to release letters, confirm witness cooperation, or publicly correct claims she knows to be false, because doing so would compromise the very process meant to deliver a fair outcome. She's asked the public to let the legal process work rather than demanding she step outside its boundaries. In the meantime, outside groups have tried to fill the information gap themselves. The United Cajun Navy, the volunteer search organization that helped look for Wells before his body was found, released its own independent timeline report based on GPS data, photographs, and witness statements. Even that report couldn't close the central hole in this case. Exactly when Wells was last seen alive, with conflicting accounts placing it anywhere between 4:30 and 6 p.m. on July 4th. As the group's vice president put it, that gap has been there since the beginning, and nobody has been able to fill it. As of this week, no charges have been filed. No date has been set for the grand jury, and no public cause of death exists for a case that started with a routine call about a sinking boat and grew into a national conversation about race, transparency, and how much a community is owed while an investigation runs its course. Today would have been Nolan Wells' 19th birthday. His community in Ocean Springs is holding a prayer rally tonight, still waiting, like the rest of the country, for the answers this case has yet to provide. If you've been following this with us, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what you think the grand jury is going to find. Subscribe for the update the moment it drops.